Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the global opening of Avatar 2, The Way of Water, where it made $435 million, far below the $500 million that was being projected by the so-called box office experts. But we have the story here from Nancy and also from Tony over at Deadline as to what is going on with this movie, whether or not this is a bad sign, a bad early sign for this film. Personally, I think not. And this is coming from someone that absolutely hated this movie, but we'll talk about that. And we will also talk about updates to Black Panther, because there's now a lot of word going around and rumors going around that it's actually a $100 million flop, when in reality, it's actually getting close to $100 million in net gain profits. I will talk about that and why my methodology differs from the methodology used by some other YouTubers and some other box office breakdown peoples. But before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, slap that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you are subscribed with the bell notification on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So starting off, of course, with the worldwide numbers for Avatar 2, The Way of Water. $435 million. And it even says the highly anticipated sequel, yes, I guess for some it was highly anticipated, not for this person, has finished its first weekend with $434.5 million globally. Of that, $300.5 comes from the international box office. That makes a lot of sense to me at the very least. The worldwide opening reps the third highest global weekend posted by any Hollywood film during the pandemic era, just behind Doctor Strange 2's $442 million. So that's right, this film currently tracking behind the worldwide total of Doctor Strange 2. Now, don't think to yourself, okay, well, if it's tracking behind that, doesn't that mean that because Doctor Strange 2 ended $950 million and didn't break $1 billion, that's likely going to happen for Avatar: The Way of Water? Not really, and there's a big reason as to why that is the fact, or why that is the case. When it comes to Avatar: Way of Water, the only tickets that are really selling for the movie, as far as just grand scale, are the very high-priced tickets, the ones that are in the IMAX 3D showing, the Dolby Vision 3D showing, right? All of the biggest showings possible, the most expensive showings possible as well. Those are the ones that are selling. You have a lot of people who are not going to see the movie this weekend because there are a lot of those seats being sold, and therefore there are not a lot of good seats left in those theaters. So you have a lot of people that are actually waiting to go see the film next weekend and the weekend after, and especially with the holiday weekend coming up and the holiday weeks rather coming up, you're going to have a lot of people going to see this movie during the week when there's typically less people who have just regular jobs. And so I think because of that, you're going to see the numbers actually pick up quite a bit. And I think it's going to overtake that total number of Doctor Strange 2 very, very quickly, at the very least by the end of next weekend, because even though I do still suspect that we'll have a pretty big drop-off for this movie, as it is a massive box office film that's over 3 hours long and also has, I would say mixed reviews. Some are going to try to point to, well, according to box office whatever, and according to this site and this site, that the audiences are loving this movie. No, I can say that based off of actual people who I've actually talked with, there are people who are mixed on this movie. And I would say the vast majority of people are mixed on this movie at best, by saying, oh, the effects are great, but the story's not. Right? There are some people out there that think the story and the effects are great. And again, I think that's a very, very rare number, though. Most people, though, at the very least, or at the best case scenario, really think that the film is just okay, that the visuals are mind-blowing, but the story is not that great. And then there's also that portion of people like me who think, okay, I don't care how good or bad the visuals are, the story is not there. The movie is 3 hours long, and it's not a good 3-hour film, because guess what? People are going to try to point out to say, you keep talking about the film being long. It's not that the film is long that makes the film boring. It's the fact that the film is long and it's wasted time. It's clearly wasted time on screen, where James Cameron has no idea really what to do next with his story. And so he's like, I'm going to spend a lot of time on this specific moment, or I'm going to spend a lot of extra time on this specific sequence. I'm going to make the ending feel like it lasts forever, because it does last forever, and it's not going to feel good. It's not going to be one of those endings where you're like, oh man, I cannot wait to see what happens. It's going to be, oh man, I'm looking at my watch and I'm thinking, this film did not need to be 3 hours long. And there's a good 3-hour movie, and then there's a bad 3-hour movie. This so happens to be one of the bad 3-hour movies. Regardless of any of that, making $435 roughly million worldwide in your opening weekend is still pretty strong. Making $135 million roughly in your domestic opening is also quite strong, though I will say that is a far cry from the $150 to $200 million that was being projected. But I think we do have a little bit of a better understanding as to why these numbers are coming underneath projections. Essentially, it's that people did not want to waste the 3 hours hours of their life going to see the film in 2D. They're like, if I'm going to go see the movie, if I'm going to waste 3 hours of my life, I'm going to go see it in the very best possible way by spending it on and wasting my money on IMAX 3D, etc., rather than going to see it in 2D, right? So there are still people going to see it in regular formatting, but not nearly to the same extent that we're seeing with these other ones. And that's basically what Tony and Nancy over at Deadline are trying to point out there, is that the film is really, again, relying heavily on these higher screens, right? It says, when it comes to the ultimate fate of Avatar 2, which was propped greatly by IMAX, PLF, and premium 3D ticket sales this weekend at 62%, we have to play the long game. 20% of the sequel's pre-sales are for showtimes beyond this weekend. That's interesting. Normally, for an average Marvel movie, their pre-sales stand at 5% beyond the weekend. So as you can see, a lot of people are long-terming this, right? Are saying, I'm buying my ticket far in advance because I want to go see it with like that middle seat, the best seat possible, in the biggest screen as well. So this is the reason why, for anyone trying to say that the opening weekend for this movie is spelling gloom and doom, look at, again, that average ticket price of, again, the average pre-sale for a Marvel film being 5% and this one being at 20%, I think should be a huge red flag that, no, this film still has a long way to run, a long way to go. Media outlets at the time of Titanic and Avatar's play immediately declared them bombs before they respectively became the highest grossing films of all time. Now, I don't think that's going to happen to the same degree with this movie because this film is just not very good. And I think the facade of James Cameron and of the Avatar universe is not nearly as strong. And I think that if you look to the raw ticket sales for this versus the first film, I think it's going to be night and day. But again, we'll have to wait and see when those actually come out to play. As you can see, it's also, again, providing a little bit of protection by saying it's got an A Cinema Score. Remember, Cinema Score is complete garbage because it doesn't release any actual data with it. I trust ComScore usually a little bit more. It said that one got 91% 5 stars on the ComScore post-track, and that included a very high recommend. The problem, though, is that because it's less people spending more money, you have a high recommend amongst a smaller population. And so it's going to have that word of mouth that's going to bring money in because the people going are going to spend more per ticket, but it's not going to be that you're going to have a record-breaking number of people or number of tickets being sold on this film. It says right here, the Avatar 2's Friday to Saturday decline is only 16%. That's the best Friday to Saturday hold for a year-end tentpole. I love when they come up with these random things. What does that even mean, right? Beating The Rise of Skywalker, which had a 47% drop. No surprise there. Force Awakens at 43%. Spider-Man No Way Home at 39%. Last Jedi at 39%. Rogue One 35%. Top Gun Maverick was floated as a comparable to Avatar 2, given how it was a long-awaited sequel to a legacy film. We obviously know that there are a lot of big differences right, it says, even ahead of Tom Cruise's title, which declined 27% between its first Friday and Saturday, Top Gun had a 5.67 multiplier of its 3-day opening and got to $718.7 million. See how that worked? It's the 7th highest opening of 2022, but the top grossing movie of the year. Tentpoles do leg out off lower openings, and that's the expectation here with Avatar 2. But again, I think that they are playing a little bit of protection for this movie, and I, again, agree with some of their assessments. I think some of their assessments, especially the pre-sales one, because again, as I was saying before, it makes a lot of sense that people are saying, I want to see this film. If I'm going to spend the time and energy that I'll need to actually watch and slog through this Avatar James Cameron ego fest, I'm going to do it in the best seat possible. It makes sense then that the pre-sales are going to be further out from opening weekend, more so than some of the other big releases. Regardless of any of that, the film is underneath projections, but I think that it will probably catch up by the end of next weekend, and if not then at the very least 3 weeks out because of next weekend being Christmas and that possibly being a factor there. If you actually look to some of the domestic box office numbers, as I had mentioned previously on thenumbers.com, if you want to see what I mean about number of tickets being sold and average ticket price and why that's important, if you look at Black Panther Wakanda Forever and then you compare that to Top Gun Maverick, you'll notice that Black Panther had 45.6 million tickets actually sold, whereas Top Gun Maverick had 78.3 million tickets sold. If you compare that to years previous, you'll recognize that there are other films from previous years that sold many more tickets than these movies, including, of course, the first Black Panther film, because the average ticket price is a lot higher these days in general for the basic showings, let alone the higher prices for the IMAX 3D, and now, of course, having more types of premium offerings that were not available. We have a lot more theaters now that can have more premium offerings than than existed when the first Black Panther had originally come out. With all that being said, though, if we actually look at Avatar: The Way of Water, worldwide it made $434.5 million. So again, well below the $500 million it was projected to make. But with all the things that are being accounted for, I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Do not sleep on this movie, right? People slept on the first film. People slept on Titanic as the film, as Deadline had mentioned, and it ended up being massive. I think that we'll have to wait again second, third weekends to have a better idea. Also, look at the daily numbers for this movie, because I think that this film will probably have some pretty high daily numbers, and especially when you compare this film to some other movies, right? So I'll have this comparison chart up a couple more times as we cover the box office and continue this on, because as you can see right now in this opening weekend, 134, it's a far cry from Spider-Man No Way Home's $260 million, a far cry from Top Gun Maverick's, 100, or not that far, Avatar: Way of Water is actually better than the $126 million of Top Gun Maverick. I think Maverick, though, had a much stronger week 1 to week 2 drop-off than what Avatar: Way of Water probably will end up having. It also is not nearly as strong as the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness $187 million opening weekend. But when you look at those numbers, right, those daily numbers, look at Doctor Strange, it fell to $13 million on its Monday. Top Gun Maverick was at 33. Spider-Man No Way Home was at 37. Remember, this was one that came out over the holidays, so expect this movie to have a very strong Monday number. I would not be surprised at all if the film has a very similar number to its Sunday, or not too far off from its Sunday, with all things being considered, right? So it will be interesting to see whether it does the Top Gun Maverick route of making, right, 30, 15, 14, 25, 36, or whether it does the Spider-Man No Way Home holiday numbers of 37, 31, 27. So again, that'll be an interesting number to see long-term domestically. Does it follow the route of Spider-Man No Way Home, which had ended its total domestic at 814, or does it follow the Top Gun Maverick, $718 million domestic? Or some would say, what if it follows the Doctor Strange? I don't think it's going to follow this one. I think that this will be a massive film in every single degree. But we will, of course, be comparing it to try to get a good idea of where the film will probably end up by the end of its run. Actually, again, $1.9 billion was made by Spider-Man No Way Home. I think at this point, it's actually probably hard to say and hard to see Avatar making that much money, or as much money as Spider-Man No Way Home did, but it's still way too early to tell, so we'll have to, of course, break that down once we actually get closer to it. All right, let's talk about Black Panther, because this is one that's gotten a lot of news attention recently. A lot of people have been, again, running with this new narrative that the film is actually going to be a $100 million loss, when in reality, it's probably closer to being almost $100 million gain. And it all comes down to reports about the marketing for this movie being a lot higher than what it typically would be for for a standard MCU film or for a standard big budget film. The problem with that is that when you do decide to start taking into account, even if it is being reported, right, even if the report is accurate, if you're going to start taking into account things that are higher than the standard, and you're going to only include those higher than the standards in specific cases, that creates a bit of a problem, right? If I said, okay, well, Black Panther Wakanda Forever is being reported as costing more, okay, well, does that mean now I have to go to every single film and try to get their exact cost and their exact spending as far as marketing is concerned, and compare that and try to break that down? Because if I do that, well, then I also then have to say, okay, how much are they getting in tax credits? How much are they getting as far as product placement cost, right? Or rather, the credits they're getting from product placement. How much of the reported, money that's being spent on marketing is actually one of those deals where they're spending money, but they're also getting money in return, and so it offsets, right? Because sometimes you have these movies that will work deals out with these major corporations of car dealerships or whatever it might be, and you'll have both giving of something, and so it ends up being a bit of a wash. How much of that is taken into account for these things, right? And so because of that, I don't stray away from the standards in that regard. And so because I don't stray away from those standards, the numbers that I'm getting right now for Black Panther indicate that, based off of the typical marketing costs, that this film then ends up being around, right now, $90 million in the black, right? $90 million of profit. And I think that this film has a good chance of getting close to $800 million before the end of its run, especially with the holiday season coming up. And because of that, this film will probably get pretty close to $100 million when all is said and done in net gain profits. Now, can we still say, and again, we can go after this movie for being a bad movie, because it is. We can also go after the fact that this film is a far cry from the $1.3 billion of the first film. Absolutely. We can also go into the fact that this film's average ticket price was a lot higher, meaning a lot less people saw this film. Not just that it made less money, but so many less people saw this movie than the first one. We could talk about that too, and how that is a bad sign for the MCU going forward, that there are a lot less people, a lot smaller of an audience of movie-going MCU fans than there once was, even just a couple years ago. And I think that is something that is worth mentioning. But if we're going to talk about, reports of a higher budget, or rather reports of a higher marketing cost, etc., if it's beyond the standard, I go away from that, because if I'm going to have to do that for like just only a couple of films that we ever actually get that kind of information for, then it again raises all those questions of, okay, well, if you're going to make that one exception, you're going to have to include every single other credit, again, and that would drive me crazy. That would drive my charts crazy. And so I'm just going to stick with the standards, because that's really the safest place to be. And it really hasn't set me wrong, at least at this point in time. What we can say about Black Panther is that it is indeed slowing down. So I do still think $800 million is well in the cards for this movie. As you can see, the film is still tracking around $20 million ahead of Doctor Strange. So that has actually remained consistent. It has not really lost a lot of ground versus Doctor Strange. So since Doctor Strange ended around $411 million domestically by the end of its run, if that $20 million difference continues on, as you can see, it's now officially past the total that Doctor Strange had made, then you're looking at the total getting around $430 million. But I still think 450 is likely because, again, of the holiday season. So do I think it's going to get much more than 450? No, I don't. But 450 to 500 million is still that range domestically that I have for this movie. Probably not getting closer to $500 million, because, as I said, the film is slowing down quite dramatically, especially in the international market, where it's probably made about as much money as it's going to make. Maybe you're looking at a max of 375, but I think probably a little north of 360 to 365, maybe 370 at best, again, because of the holiday season. But really, Avatar has eaten up that international market where Black Panther has kind of run out of room. But 800 million, absolutely still in the cards for this movie, especially with the holiday season coming up. Violent Night has actually reached the point of it being profitable, $55 million worldwide. Strange World, still a $200 million flop for Disney. The Menu at $60.8 million continues to have a chance over the holiday season to make its money back. It's now less than 10 million away from breaking even, so kudos to them for pushing it out there. Devotion still a $100 million flop, and Black Adam, no matter what Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson says, guess what? Still a financial failure. Let's go ahead and dive into the charting, because we love doing charting here on OMB Reviews, and let's talk a little bit about what we're looking at for Avatar, because the budget for this movie is a mystery. Let's just be honest. You have James Cameron claiming the film needs to make around $2 billion to break even. That's what James Cameron says. If that were true, that would mean that the production budget on the film would essentially have to be around $800 million, which is just insane. And as much money as I think James Cameron would spend on this movie, I don't think any studio would, in their right mind, spend $800 million on one movie. So because of that, I have the budget set at $400 million. Now, I think that there actually is an argument to be made that it might actually be higher than this, because the reports are coming out, right, that, as far as the official reported budget, it's $350 to $400 million is the range that we're getting. But according to Deadline and other sources, they are saying, not from the studios, but from inside sources, that the budget's actually closer to possibly $460 million. And so in either way, the film needs to make at least $1 billion, and probably comfortably over $1 billion, to be able to break even. But again, because of what we have being reported here, right now it's looking like $1 billion. It's going to be its break even. I think that is going to be very easy for this film to do, as I mentioned, as the reasoning as to why I think that is the case, as I said earlier. And I think that it will probably end up getting pretty close to that within the first few weeks of its release. So by next weekend, I could see it being close in that, $700 to $800 million range. And then, the week after that, getting much closer to $1 billion. I think that this film will end up having some pretty good legs, despite the fact that the film sucks and is not worth your time and it's not worth you wasting your money. Again, even though I hate the film, I can still talk about the numbers in as an objective way as I possibly can. The fact is, again, the film is still doing well enough at this point to have a chance to make its money back. But again, it's interesting nonetheless to see that the budget is going to be a giant question mark on this movie, and it'll be interesting to see if they actually come out to explain, hey, here is what the actual film costs and how much it actually costs to make it. Violent Night, as you can see, $3 million in the black, so this film finally making money. Strange World, $235 million in the red, so still a massive flop there for Disney. Devotion, still around $100 million in the red. The Menu, as I mentioned, $8.5 $2.5 million in the red, so getting very close to almost doubling what it made in the first 2 weeks. So this still has a chance of making its money back, but again, it will need the holiday season to be basically giving it weekends like it just had, several weeks over to get to that point. She said really no numbers were reported for that to change that all that much. But let's get to Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. So again, some of the reports coming out, some of the headlines you're seeing, some of the thumbnails you're seeing are $100 million disaster. I have it at $90.8 million in the black. And again, based on typical standard costs, right? What's being reported as far as the budget is concerned, and then typical marketing cost. Is because, again, if you're going to say, well, it's being reported, you're talking about things being reported. Well, it's being reported that the marketing budget's a lot higher. Okay, but are you then also looking in to see, okay, is it making up that money in other locations, right? Are you going to, again, you have to at least be fair to the individual films. Even films that I want to fail, like Black Panther, you still got to be, still got to be fair with them and say, okay, yeah, but how much are they getting in credits, right? Whether that's tax credits, whether that's credits from product placement or any other types of, additional revenue streams, you have to take all of those things into account. And so because all of that is a giant headache, I will just stick with the standard marketing cost, which is still a crap ton of money. I mean, this film still cost $250 million production budget. $625 million break even point is still massive. $375 million total cost with marketing is already insane. So, I mean, again, we're still looking at the film being in a comfortable enough position to where even if you do have to say, or even if you do have a strong argument to say that the film costs a little bit more marketing wise, you have a $90 million cushion here that's going to be able to, again, I think make a compelling argument that the film is going to have made its money back. And again, I think that the film still has money to make, and I think $800 million by the end of its run is definitely a possibility for the movie, which would put the film closer to $100 million in the black, not in the red. But those are the numbers of the films as far as the major releases and where they currently stand. So what are y'all's thoughts? Have you seen Avatar: The Way of Water? Again, if you have not seen my review, I highly recommend it, just because I do think that there are a lot of things that people are not talking about when it comes to this movie. I really just do not think it's worth your time or your money. Apparently, there are a lot of people that disagree with me with the box office numbers coming in, and with so many pre-sales for beyond this weekend being taken into account, the film still has a lot of room to run. And so I still do think and still hold that early projection that I had of $1.5 to $2 billion, I think is still a possibility. Next weekend, of course, I always do my first 2 weeks. This is when I do my official projections. And, the vast majority of the time, my projections end up holding out, meaning that range that I give. Sometimes films will double their films, money in the, compared to the first 2 weeks. They'll double the first 2 weeks money that they made. Sometimes they'll make a lot less than that. Sometimes the legs will fall off and it'll do a lot worse. Sometimes they'll overperform, right? That happens too. Sometimes films will even underperform my charting. But if you actually look at my charting and you'll notice, again, the projections that I make, you'll notice here the actual percentage based on the first 2 weeks, right? As you can see, all of these fall usually within the 50 to 70% range. There are exceptions like Lilac Crocodile, for instance, like Smile also was an exception there. The Woman King also was an exception, did a lot better. You also have films that do worse in those projections. This, of course, would be one of those weird ones because of the fact that, again, marketing is a big question mark when it comes to Indian films. You have Invitation, actually did a lot better than some projections. Fall actually did very, very well. Bullet Train as well did well over projections. Where the Crawdad Sings is one of the best performing films so far this year, up there with Top Gun and Maverick, which also outperformed. But as you can see, if you look down to the very bottom of the chart, the average, right, compared to the first 2 weeks is 59%. So again, I may not have the you may not agree with my metrics. You may not agree with my projections as far as the break-even point. But when it comes to the projections of how much money a film is going to make as far as the range of total box office, my numbers are pretty sound, I would say. And again, you can take a look at them for yourself at my website, ombreviews.com, where I plan on updating my reviews for 2022 in film, because there are a lot of films that I've seen that I've not added here but are available over on my Letterboxd account. So you can check that out as well in the top link in the video description if you want to find out about that and more. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. Let me know your thoughts about Avatar: Way of Water, Violent Night, Strange World, any of the films that we talked about, and your general thoughts about how much money you think Avatar needs to make to break even, and how much money you think it's going to make by the end of its run. Let me know that in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, that fire button, honestly, smash the rumble button as well. A huge shout out to Chris from the 80s. Check him out on YouTube. I will get the December video of shout outs recorded tomorrow, hopefully. Baby Thor is still a little bit on the sick side. You can hear I'm kind of getting what he had a little bit too. So hopefully he'll be back at daycare tomorrow. And if he is, it means I'll have time to record that December video. And anyway, thank you all very much for your time, for your patience as well. Chris from the 80s as well. Thank you for your patience. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my November Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off with Patreon with Father Luca Illich. Thank you very much, Father. Garrett Searles, Jaimir Iri Hymason, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Laura, The Modern Major General Story, Orange Hat Reviews, who you can check out on YouTube at his channel, Orange Hat Reviews, Rosetta Allen, who also has a YouTube channel that you can check out at Eagle Writer, and Miss Martin Muses, who also has a YouTube channel, Miss Martin Muses, and of course the amazing Empress of the Universe, Tina B, who you can check out at her YouTube channel, Tina B, where she hosts the show with Stephanie B, one of my mods, and one of my Valkyrie, called Soup to Nuts. Check out Soup to Nuts, and it premieres pretty much every Friday. So again, shout out to all of my Patreon people, also to all my Subscribe Star people, starting off with Matt317. Check him out on Twitch at Matt317. The R, Fast Reaction, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. And ZK-Man you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co to follow him as he starts his podcast, and also for many of his musical musings as well. Check him out. Very, very talented guy. And then lastly, my locals peeps, we got Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, UAB Mad Dog, Mike Jackson for the win, J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer, Robert Barnes. Thank you all so very much for supporting me. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, go ahead and check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to special things like giveaways and also exclusive podcasts that I do with John the Flickinger and other guests throughout the month of November and in the previous and the months to follow as well. And again, if any of that sounds interesting to you, especially the 4K giveaways, Steelbook giveaways, some of them that I have to give away this month are films like Starship Troopers on 4K Steelbook, Top Gun Maverick on 4K Steelbook, amongst many others. If that sounds interesting to you, check out the link and follow the instructions down below. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.